Well, today we're going to be talking about Hatshepsut and, of course, the famous female pharaoh. And we're going to go into quite a few other topics as well along the way. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we do, let's give a little bit of context of women in ancient Egypt. Now, I don't want to do any sort of revisionism and say that, men and women were absolutely treated equally and it's an egalitarian society and, I'm not going to idealize it. Yet at the same time, I want to make it very clear that in theory, and we see from the evidence, women did have a lot in the way of rights and shared some of the same kinds of positions that men did occupy to a certain extent. Not all, right? There's lots of exceptions, but so you still have the gendered roles, so to speak. But I do want to make it also clear that Egypt changes throughout time. You have starting the pre-dynastic period into the Old Kingdom, into the Middle Kingdom. When it comes to women and men, there seems to be quite a bit of equality that we see in evidence. And then with the arrival of the Hyksos during the Second Intermediate Period, you're going to have a shift because the Semitic Hyksos are very patriarchal. And when they move into Egypt, after they do what they do, and there is a significant amount of destruction, there's also a lot of transition. The New Kingdom definitely is more patriarchal than the earlier periods. And so, however, Hatshepsut happens to be from this New Kingdom period. So she is, in a sense, dealing with this a little bit of a different paradigm to a certain extent. But even having said that, by the time we get to the arrival of the Greeks into Egypt around 332 BCE, I got to tell you that the Greeks, Greek women were not treated very well, and we have from the extent sources, and we have a lot, we have sources, Egyptian women are treated very well, even during that period of time, even during that context. They definitely were allowed more privileges and rights than Greek women who are living in Egypt at this time. We do have quite a bit in the way of sources. The Egyptian desert preserves so much in the way of writings. Of course, you have papyrus and the dry missions. You have, of course, the preserves of these writings. So we have not just manuscripts and religious texts, but we have personal letters and receipts and other paraphernalia that you ordinarily would not have in other climates. So we do have a lot of evidence when it comes to women in Egypt. Taking a look at this, even by the time of the Hellenistic age in Egypt, women could own property. They could own, not only own property and manage it, but they could sell it. Property, of course, obviously includes land, portable goods, slaves, livestock, right? So they have that ability. Women, we do know, could be part of legal disputes in exactly the same way as men resolve legal settlements. So when it comes to women were entitled to sue. So if by themselves, right? So you don't have to have a male that sues in representation for them. No, they can sue. So there's a lot of freedom there. Um, Egyptian women obviously could have independent businesses. They had quite a few. In fact, there's evidence that one fourth to one third of all businesses in Egypt by the time we get to the Hellenistic era were owned by women, owned by women. So that's pretty remarkable. Women could be in charge of not just in charge of a large farm or a small farm or a business. They could be even the boss over various manufacturing companies. There's ceramics and obviously making of textiles. Women could have that kind of position. Women in ancient Egypt could employ men uh, under them, and so there could be a female boss over many men. You know, it's interesting because this was not just in Egypt, but throughout the region of even going into the Middle East and even to Arabia. We do have to remember, I gotta tell you, people don't remember this, is that Khadijah, who was the wife of Muhammad, remember that she was an independent businesswoman that traded throughout the Middle East, and she was the one who hired Muhammad to work for her alongside other men. So this is not just in Egypt, but other places in the Middle East. So there you have it. Um, Women, of course, came with their dowry, and in the event of a divorce, they took their dowry with them. Uh, Now, when the husband died, or he divided up the property into three parts. Maybe by three parts, you're thinking, okay, so one third, obviously went well. See, three parts, and sometimes, of course, it went obviously to her, it went to the children, and it went to uh, the relatives of the husband. What I find is interesting, however, in the case of divorce, you still have the division in threes, one third to the husband, one third to the wife, and one third to the children. I find that very interesting. So, when it comes to marriage, now you think the Egyptians, religion permeates everything in life. It does. But did you know there's not an Egyptian word for the word wedding? What? So there was no ceremony per se. Now there could be, but it was not mandated. So basically, getting married simply means moving into that person's house. Getting a divorce could be as easy as just moving out of the person's house, which is interesting. Now, there was no age limit when it comes to marriage, but it was always after menstruation. There was no rings that were exchanged. There was no special bridal clothing. There was no change of name to indicate that they were married. It's fascinating that a belief, a society that is so steeped in tradition of all types, when it comes to marriage, was a little bit not as formal. So divorce was strictly a private matter, right? And it it could be said just on the say of one of the people that are not satisfied. They basically said they were out, and that was it, right? It's like, whoa, okay. So now, having said that, pregnancy was a big deal. And this is where we're moving into another category altogether. Now, when a woman became pregnant, That was something that was very important. And there is this idea that the more children that one has, the more important that person would be, that woman would be. In Egypt, you did have polygamy. You did have multiple marriages, and so multiple wives. And it doesn't seem to work the other way in this particular society. However, at the same time, um, you know, you have uh, um, of course, different forms in the sense of the marital situation. You always have that first wife who has it's a more degree over some of the other wives. You do seem to have that, and that kind of brings it in to the pharaonic context. So, but uh, we do have other bits and pieces here and there, but I just want to mention. So this is kind of the context of ancient Egypt. Oh, by the way, um, the mother named her child immediately following birth, making sure that the child would have a name in case there was, because a name was important in connection to uh, dying early. They have a name so they will not be lost to the underworld. So that's a little bit of context of women in ancient Egypt. Obviously, there's changes throughout time between the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and moving into the Hellenistic age. But I would say, in short, in general, women, unlike the Greeks, did enjoy more in the way of rights and privileges, and at least on paper, they were accorded equal rights uh, for the most part. Now, Hatshepsut was not the first pharaoh that was a female pharaoh. There is a precedent for that, and we're going to go into that right now. One of the earliest women that attained a position of authority in Egypt was one of them. His name is called Neith-Hotep. Neith-Hotep, she thrived around 3100, 3100 BCE. So this began a precedent of powerful women in Egypt. And of course, at first, they thought that she was the wife of Narmer, the very first king of the first dynasty, and the mother of Hor-Aha. But we have now realized now that taking a look at the archaeology, that she was actually the wife of the second pharaoh of the first dynasty. She was the wife of Hor-Aha. And she was co-regent uh, with their son, Diger, who happened to be too young to take the throne when Hor-Aha died. And so, as a result of that, she gained power. And so she was the one in authority because obviously Diger was too young. It's interesting, we find evidence of this. There's an inscription of Diger, which shows a procession of all these festive boats. And at the right, it shows a royal Sirik. Royal Sirik, basically, that is, it's before a cartouche, but it's kind of a rectangular square that has Horus on top. And that's what you write things inside. Anyway, but what happens is that in this particular image, there's Diger's name is inside, so it's protected by the sacred boundary, just like we later on see with a cartouche. We see, of course, the Horus falcon on top, as I mentioned, and the Serek, sorry, the falcon holds a war mace, in which it's clubbing a kneeling foe to death. This is not a pleasant sight, but anyway, Neith-Hotep's name appears at the left in a diagonal sense, showing her association with her son Diger, and of course, I mean, with the yeah, and of course, obviously, being connected to Hor-Aha. So now, what is also interesting that I want to bring up is the fact that the ancient Egyptians, before you have pyramids, you have what's called mastabas. And mastabas, what they would do, these are just kind of made out of brick, mud brick sometimes, but what they would do, these are like steps. And they put one, and these are tombs. They sometimes had two chambers, one for the treasures and one for the body. And then as time went on, they put one mastaba on top of another mastaba on top of another mastaba. And so you start getting these steps that will eventually become a step pyramid. But during this period of time of the first dynastic, during the first dynasty, excuse me, you're going to have um, these gigantic mastabas that are burial places for the pharaoh. Well, what happens is they found this giant mastaba and it was dedicated to her and not one of the male pharaohs because she already is taking on these reigns of power. And so she is uh, becomes a full queen of Egypt. There's a few reasons why we know that she's a full queen of Egypt. First of all, she appears on several clay seal impressions located inside a serak, which, by the way, uh, this was reserved exclusively as practice for a Egyptian ruler. So her name appears within this proto kind of cartouche, Sarat, right? Second, her tomb is that indeed of an Egyptian king. In fact, it includes cultic features that were exclusively used for the pharaohs. And third, of course, there is discovered a inscription from the Wadi Amira area, and Nitocris is said arranged and ordered an expedition through the Wadi in attempt to mine ore and harvest feedstocks. This is as an independent order. So there's evidence that she made this order independently, did it of her own volition. So again, you have her name being that of showing through the iconography, that of a ruler. Second of all, she does have the traditional tomb of an Egyptian king. And third of all, there's evidence of her exacting orders. So there he is. So it's interesting. I just want to talk about Neith a little bit. Now, Neith Hotep, of course, you see the name Neith. Neith was actually a goddess of war and hunting. You're going to see her name coming about again. And It's interesting that she is definitely a fierce deity that is not oftentimes talked about. She's represented as a woman who wears a red crown, and she's shown as holding a bow and arrow. Sometimes she's shown with a harpoon, which I think is rather interesting, right? And very complex goddess. Yet Neith was considered at this time uh, one of the eldest of the gods. And when there was a dispute between Horus and Seth that we see, especially going into the Old Kingdom period, Neith is said to settle these disputes. She's the arbitrator in between the two. That there's a work called the Contending of Seth and Horus. And Neith here is asked by the gods, understood as the most ancient of the goddesses, to decide who is to rule, right? And of course, she chooses Horus, right? So, of course, Neith also makes a threat that if you don't choose Horus, if you don't agree with my decision, I will cause the sky, she says, to crash to the earth. Why is because Neith is understood to be one of the two pillars that supports the sky. So there's two supports of the heavens, and the other is Selkut. So Selkut and Neith they support the sky above. And so she says, if you don't choose Horus, I'm going to remove myself, and the sky is going to come crashing down. But Neith is also, she has many roles in the early dynastic period, even pre-dynastic period. She's referred to as the opener of ways. And again, she's connected to war. She's also connected to opening these underworld pathways. So and so she's connected to the underworld as well as the overworld. Yeah, and so so that means that this first early pharaoh that I just mentioned has quite a distinguished name, as you can imagine, right? Oh, one more little bit on Neith. She is the one who generates things, but she never connects to a male, and so she's kind of a pathogenic creatrix in a sense, or autogenetic, right? She's one of the earliest ones, the virgin that gives life to the world. So you can see the reason why I bring up this illustration is you can see early on uh, some of these some of these goddesses are quite powerful indeed, and they do reflect the society in which they are the ones who are overseers. Just bring that up. Okay, so Neith Hotep's tomb was discovered, by the way, in 1897, um, and was examined again in 1898. And of course, as I mentioned, it's just this gigantic mastaba, but unfortunately, it's heavily eroded. We don't see much from it, but all we know is that it was of significant size. Well, the next female pharaoh that we have record of, her name is Merneith. Now, I think that's interesting. You got Merneith. By the way, Mer is the ancient name for pyramids. Neith, of course, you know the word Neith. And so, again, that name has some significance there. Uh, Now, she is the daughter of King Diger. Remember Diger? We already talked about. So that means, so she became the senior royal wife later on Digit. But she, of course, as you can tell, was the daughter of King Diger, which means that she would be the granddaughter of Horaha, and most importantly, Neith-Hotep. So there is this strong line that is moving through, as you can see. And she is, we find inscriptions, various seals discovered in her son's grave, which states plainly in the hieroglyphics that she is the king's mother, Merneith. Like her grandmother, Neith-Hotep, her name reveals a dedication to the same goddess, Neith, right? And of course, the word Merneith specifically means, however, beloved of by Neith. And so you see on her stele connections to that deity. According to many Egyptologists, what happens is that, Digit, um, unfortunately, uh, who is her husband, died too young, and for his son then to rule. And so Merneith then ruled until he was old enough to take over succession. So there you have it. Now it's interesting because once again we see all these various tombs, these giant tombs, and her tomb was built on the very same scale as those of the surrounding male tombs, whether it be Den's tomb or Digit's tomb or otherwise. So again, equal treatment there, which I think fine is. In fact, she was even buried with 40 of her servants, which of course this is the traditional when a pharaoh is it's time to end. The servant never ends their occupation with them. So if you sign up, right, that if you sign up to be a pharaoh, I'm sorry, decided to work for Pharaoh, what happens is that your job continues with them into the afterlife. And so as a result of that, um, you're all kind of brought into the tomb, and the big seal is closed up, and then you either starve to death, you do ritual suicide. In some cases, we know from forensics, people panic. Well, she was accorded the same as everybody, as all the other pharaohs. So, oh no, I'm not referring to any images. So I'm just a little bit under the weather. Okay. Anyway, now what happens is that she was also venerated with a tomb at Saqqara, so which I think is interesting as well. The next pharaoh is the female pharaoh is Khentkawes. She thrived around 20 feet, 2530 BCE, and she was the daughter of Pharaoh Menkaure, who was the builder of the smallest of the three pyramids of Giza. According to one scenario, she became the wife of Shepsepkoth and then the mother of Userkoth. In another scenario, she marries King Userkoth and becomes the mother of Sura and Neferkari. But the point of the matter is she gets these elaborate names. She is mother of the two dual kings, and she is, of course, accorded again great power and prestige on her own. In fact, and so in fact, she receives at Giza her own pyramid, a chapel, a water tank, granaries, a valley temple, and a pyramid town dedicated to her, and even a boat pit, the night boat of the sun god Ra. And we think that there is another one. And it's very clear by looking at the complex that she is connected very much with the pharaoh Menkaure, and that's, of course, her father. And there is evidence that she had a significant amount of power as well. Okay, the next one, we're getting there. I'm just trying to show there is a precedent for Hatshepsut, but I think it's interesting to go through some of the female pharaohs. The next one is Nitocris. Nitocris, around 2100 BCE. This is from the era of Pippa II, very end of the Old Kingdom. This is a very troubled time, full of anarchy. In fact, the various states that Egypt is divided into, these are called nomes, were in rebellion. And so those who are governors are called nomarchs. And so you have constant fighting between these 42 nomes going back and forth. According to the Turan king list, a certain Merneith, the very last king of the Old Kingdom, only reigned 1 year. And this is where we get the Greek historian Herodotus, right? And he says that he was murdered and that his sister queen, Nitocris, then became queen of Egypt and then sought to avenge him for the murder. Now, I find the story quite entertaining, as Herodotus often is. The story goes as follows. He says, Nitocris succeeded her brother. He had been the king of Egypt and his subjects, who then placed her upon the throne and put him to death. Determined to avenge his death, she devised a cunning scheme by which she destroyed a vast number of Egyptians. She constructed a spacious underground chamber, and on pretense of inaugurating it, threw a banquet, inviting all those who she knew to have been responsible for the murder of her brother. Suddenly, as they were feasting, she let the river in upon them by means of a large secret duct. And according to the story, they all drowned, right? Now, of course, Herodotus continued that she committed suicide, but, he gets things always mixed up. In fact, it seems to be confused with the Babylonian queen who's connected with Darius and her suicide. But what happens, in fact, her name, Nitocris, was also known as Nitocris, which means the soul of Ra is divine. And so she did exist, and she is on various lists. But it's interesting because even though she appears on various lists, you know, she doesn't appear in others. However, Herodotus and Manetho do list her as an independent queen of Egypt. So here we have another one. So we have Sobekneferu. She reigned from 1806 to 1802 BCE. Again, we're going to be very careful about these dates because they slide around quite a bit. But she ruled for about 4 years independently. She is shown on the Turin King list that she ruled 3 years, 10 months, and 24 days. And of course, the name means the beauty of Sobek. And so she's another important individual. Actually, it looks like that her eldest sister was intended to be queen. And then what happened is that she became queen instead. And of course, her name is enclosed in a cartouche in a very royal manner. She also had her own pyramid at Awara. And so, it's pretty interesting. Many of her headless statues have been preserved. What I find is interesting about this, and you can see why I'm bringing this up in the context of Hatshepsut, is that we see within these statues a combination of elements from a male to a female dress. So here we have a female pharaoh that's already taking on the male pharaonic dress at times. And so there is a precedent for Hatshepsut. There is a precedent as early as we get with Sobekneferu. So we see this. So she made many additions to the pyramid complex of Amun-Hot III at Hawawa. She also created a labyrinth that is mentioned by Herodotus. So, and of course, with her death, the 12th dynasty ended, and that's the end of the Golden Age of the Middle Kingdom, and the very weak 13th dynasty followed. We're getting closer now. We have Ahhotep the First is another female pharaoh. You're going, wow, there's quite a few. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make you realize that, wow, she is not the exception. There are so many, yes, there's so many others, but there's still some differences. Ahhotep, she ruled during the end of the 17th dynasty. She was the daughter of Queen Teshera, or Teti the Small, and Sitker Ahmos. She was both the sister and wife of the pharaoh Tao, Tao. Her name, Ahhotep, means the moon is satisfied. Her titles included a great royal wife, also the associate of the white crown bearer, also king's mother. And so we see this here. Now, what happens is that what I find fascinating is that her second son, Othmos the First, is fighting against the Hyksos. So now we're at the end of the second intermediate period. Othmos, her son, is fighting the Hyksos, which of course leaves, you remember Egypt, much of it is destroyed. A lot of the monuments are destroyed during this time. I do have to bring this up. The Hyksos do ravage quite a bit of damage. Why am I bringing it up? Because later on, it is Hatshepsut who is going to be rebuilding Egypt from the damage caused by the Hyksos. We have to mention this. So anyway, Othmos is fighting the Hyksos, but he can't always be there in Egypt to watch things because he's pushing the Hyksos from Egypt and into what is now the southern part of the Levant, with the southern part of what is now Palestine. So who's going to be in charge? Well, guess what? Ahhotep the first, she is in charge. So then he, of course, by the way, also Ahmose the first, after he finishes there, he goes down to the south and he fights, he leads an army against Nubia, also to expel the Hyksos from that region. So he's pretty busy, right? So while he's off in campaign, a group of Hyksos decide to attack Thebes. They're going to try to steal the throne. However, guess who leads? That's right, Ahhotep the first. And so what happens is that she actually brought all the troops together as a military leader. And she personally led the fight against them. Wow. Yeah. So she's in charge, right? So mom is in charge. There is an inscription that is dedicated to this event. And I'm going to read it to you. It goes as follows. She is the one who has accomplished the rights and taken care of Egypt. She has looked after her soldiers. She has guarded her. She has brought back her fugitives and collected together her deserters. She has pacified Upper Egypt and expelled her rebels. Wow, because of her valiant actions, she was given a title. Although I think it's an interesting title. It's called Golden Flies of Valor. Her son gave her that one. Also gave her a bunch of beautiful jewelry and ornamental weaponry, which was later found in a tomb near the Valley of the Kings. So what we see, but we have Ahhotep's outer coffin was buried. We have found that. The coffin shows the queen with a tripartite wig and a modus. And then what happened was we're one more down. We're almost there. We're in Hatshepsut. So here we go. One more. Now there was another female pharaoh known as Neferneferuaten, and she was actually the daughter of Ahhotep and Thou. Yeah, the daughter. So yeah, again, we had another mother-daughter, or actually it was mother-granddaughter, but now a mother-daughter situation. She was both the sister and wife of Ahmose the First, who was the founder of the 18th dynasty, and she became the mother of the second king, Amenhotep the First. But she gains a little bit even more authority, and that is that she gains more power. We'll go there, but she also becomes a co-regent during her son's minority, and co-regent with her grandson Thutmose the First during his minority. And she just keeps living. She goes on for a long time. She has many titles. That she is, of course, known as the Great of Grace, the Great of Praises, King's Mother, Great King's Wife. Here's a new one, God's Wife. United with the White Crown is another one. King's Daughter and King's Sister. But she was also revered as the Goddess of Resurrection. They called her the Goddess of Resurrection. And they also called her God's wife, Amun. Now, as an Amun Ra. Now you can see the religious titles really starting to gain, and you can see Hatshepsut will continue this precedent where she is God's wife, the wife of Amun Ra, right? We see from a donation stele from Karnak, it shows how King Ahmose purchased the office known as the second prophet of Amun, and gave this position as an endowment to Nefertari. in fact, along with land and goods and administrators. So she's in charge. She becomes in connection directly to this office. So so she is very important. Also, she is given her own staff, temple properties. She can administer her own estate. She has workshops. She has treasuries. She is clearly a person of great power and prestige. And you can see again, making way and getting things ready for that, which is where we're at right now. So, what we've learned so far in this talk is that Hatshepsut doesn't appear autochthonically out of nowhere, out of the earth. She just, there is already a precedent of female leadership in Egypt, even in the position of Pharaoh in all religious sense, starting to gain and to be accepted in Egypt. So here we go. Well, we have to start. We Hatshepsut. We have to talk about, of course, she's Thutmose the First. Thutmose the First. He reigned from 1506 to 1493 BCE. He is known as a great conqueror. Once again, the Egyptians, they didn't stop in Palestine, in southern Palestine, defeating the Hyksos. They continued moving north, taking over much of Palestine, all the way up to the area of the Jezreel Valley. But what's happening is that he's going to push a little bit further, even. So he does conquer further south. I do want to mention that he extends Egypt down to the third cataract on the Nile. So he was able to take on the king of Nubia. In fact, captured the king of Nubia and killed him. His head, by the way, was set upon the prow of his ship. And so, of course, for the next 500 years, Nubia happens to be part of Egypt because of him. But as he's fighting in the north, Thutmose, he is extending Egypt deep into Syro-Palestine, and he actually reaches the Euphrates River. It's all the way to the Euphrates River. In fact, he even sets up a stele on the other side of the Euphrates. And then he went into an elephant hunt. I never think about elephants hanging around Syria, but he goes on an elephant hunt around Aleppo. And so there you have it. He was also curious because he thought that the Euphrates River was running the wrong direction. See, it's like, why is the water running? It's running right from north to south, because as you all know, because the Nile River, rivers are supposed to run from south to north. Little do you know that a large portion of rivers flow the other way. But oh well, this is experience. Thutmose is responsible for enlarging the temple of Karnak. In fact, two colossal statues stood in the hall, one with the crown of Upper Egypt and the other with the crown of Lower Egypt. It was a wooden colonnaded hallway that was made out of, actually it's wood columns that were supposed to represent the papyrus marsh that's connected to the story of creation. But he only managed to change a few of these into stone. There's still much of them wood at that time. This is the setup, right? This is the context here. Now, Thutmose, he was buried in the Valley of the Kings. But what happened is now we get Thutmose II. He reigned from 1493 to 1479, and he was one of the wives. Sorry, one of the wives of Thutmose. He was the son of one of Thutmose I's lesser wives. So once again, Thutmose II, he was the son of one of Thutmose I's lesser wives, a certain Metorfet by name. And because she was very young at that time, what happened is that Thutmose II married his half-sister, Hatshepsut, who was the daughter of Thutmose I, with his primary wife, Ames. I'll say this again, because we got to understand this, right? So Thutmose II, who reigned from 1493 to 1479, yes, he was the son of Thutmose I, right? Yes, also Hatshepsut was also the daughter of Thutmose I. You got it? So that makes them brother and sister, but they are only half brother and half sister because Thutmose II, he was married to a lesser wife of Thutmose I, and Hatshepsut was the daughter of the first wife of Hatshepsut. Remember we talked about earlier about the lineages and how important it is when it comes to first wife and second wife. You're going to have this even in the biblical story of Abraham, right? So you have it, of course, right? So there you have it. So, but the point is that means that she has some distinction going on there. Okay, so during this period of time, now Thutmose the second, he's pharaoh with his wife Hatshepsut. He's putting down all these rebellions, especially the Bedouin in Palestine are causing lots of problems. Now, there is, however, having said this is important. You gotta listen up. There is evidence to demonstrate that Thutmose I really didn't want Thutmose II to be the pharaoh. Some evidence. There's evidence that he wanted Hatshepsut to be the pharaoh instead. So now, what happened is that, and how do we know this? Because we have evidence for this belief. Now, having said that, many Egyptologists would say, yeah, but there's a conflict there. She wanted she wanted to have this be true, or she created this idea, and that is a possibility. But in her mortuary temple, there's an inscription that states as follows. In her mortuary temple, it says as follows: Then His Majesty, I'm reading the inscription, then His Majesty said to them, this daughter of mine, Kanu Matanum Hatshepsut, may she live, I have appointed as my successor upon my throne. She shall direct the people in every sphere of the palace. It is she, indeed, who shall lead you. Obey her words. Unite yourselves at her command. And then I'm still reading the inscription. The royal nobles, the dignitaries, and the leaders of the people heard this proclamation of the promotion of his daughter, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, not cared. May she live eternally, unquote. Okay, so that's where I get the idea. It's right, there's a quote there, right? So it's pretty good evidence there. At least this is her perception or the belief of some, but I have more to the story. Now it's probable that, during the time of Thutmose II's reign, she was the real power behind the throne. She was definitely very intelligent, very well organized, as we saw later on her own. So she is the brains behind everything, right? Now we see during his reign, there's in the Karnak Gateway, which dates from his period of time. It shows a pharaoh, which is him, but he's side by side with his wife's sister Hatshepsut. So you can see already there's a sense of equality between the two. But then there is another image nearby of her standing by herself. What? Wait, what? So you have this equality, and there I am. So you can see that, yeah, she is the one who is more distinguished. We have he did of course he did die, um, and we do have his mummy. We have his mommy too, but we do have his mummy. And they realized that he was not exactly in the best of health. When they looked at his mummy back in 1886, according to Gaston Maspero, he had scarcely reached the age of 30 when he fell victim to a disease of which the process of embalming could not remove the traces. The skin is scabrous in patches and covered with scars, while the upper part of the skull is bald. The body is thin and somewhat shrunken and appears to have lacked vigor and muscular power. So, unquote. So he appears to be already very weak in a physical sense. But she was obviously more vigorous. She continued to live on. But now she had an interesting predicament. So here's the problem: is that while Tutmos II lived, she's married to the sickly boy, right? And she's the great king's wife. But then there is a toddler by the name of Tutmos III, who would soon be needing a regent. As soon as husband dies, then you're going to have to be a regent for Tutmos III. So what's going to happen is that, she started to work on creating a stronger position for herself. That in actuality, we saw this with the inscription. In actuality, she is the one that the gods favored. Now, there's another story, and here's a great story that is told. She herself told that there was a miracle that happened, a miracle, and this happened not recently, but when she was already young, way back when she was a little girl. This happened to her, this miracle, and she reminds the general public that they themselves witnessed it too. Okay, and I'll talk about this miracle. What happens is that there was a great public festival, and it's dedicated to Ammon. During this festivity, um, which is preserved and recorded in different places, right? Um, in the Red Chapel, it's an obelisks, it's the Funerary Temple. But still, Egyptologists seem divided on this. But basically, the narrative tells that basically there's this period of time where at the Karnak Temple, they're preparing for a grand procession, and the statue, the image of Ammon, is supposed to perform what is called a biet, Biayt. Some people translate this as a miracle. Other people translate this as an oracle. Some people say that this actually means a revelation. But what's happened is they're supposed to take this image of Ammon and bring it out of the temple, and it's supposed to make this grand pronouncement. This, to say what he's supposed to say, what his will is via the statue. Okay, so the statue, or the image, I should say, is brought out, being carried along with the two poles, right, to communicate with the people. Everybody's there to watch this spectacle, right? Hatshepsut tells us that this festival was different because typically when this image goes out of the temple, it makes a pronouncement. So they're all waiting for the pronouncement, and nothing happens. They wait. They wait. There's no miracle. No bit. Nothing. Silence came across the crowd. People started to panic, started to worry. People bowed their heads down. Some started to mourn. Did Ammon have nothing to say to the Egyptians, to the people? Not a word? No miracle this day? Suddenly, it is said, a great power came upon this image. And it started to whirl. And it started to move with the people who are carrying it towards the river. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And then it turned and headed towards the gate of the royal palace adjacent to Karnak. And then it swung around again as if in indecision, as if those who were carrying the image of Ammon were possessed. And so now it moved again. And it moved, as it moved northward. And then suddenly it moved again, it whirled, and it moved eastward. And then finally it moved westward. And it's like, what? And this is to the gateway called I Am Not From Him. It's called the gateway. So so you can imagine, as it's moving to and fro, the crowd's like going, what? You can imagine just running this way, almost running in all the cardinal directions, right? And at last, as it moves through, it goes into the palace adjacent to the temple. And the god found himself in the forecourt of the palace. And upon seeing him, the story goes, Hatshepsut tells everybody they must know. They've all saw this. This is a public witness for all. Hatshepsut appeared, and she left the palace. And accordingly, she went before the image of Ammon and threw herself to the ground in his presence, with her arms raised up in praise. She proclaimed that his majesty is great indeed, and said that, Ammon, you are my father. You are the being of all that exists. You created it all. Therefore, you are my father. Then what happens is that she became very brave in front of everybody who was there. And she asked this image of Ammon that is believed to be filled with this god, what is it that you desire to happen? I will do according to all you have ordered. The god then said to perform the miracle that was witnessed before everybody and communicated that she was the one to whom leadership should be given to. This is the miracle. This is the pronouncement. These are the words. In fact, what he wanted her to do is that he wanted her to go before his holy bark, right in front of the procession, and to go towards the great chapel of truth, to the Mot, in the temple's core. According to the story, she received the investiture of majesty and the equipment, dedicating her to be, from there on out, God's wife, granting her this authority and also as one who is the great queen, as well as a priestess. Hatshepsut then claimed then that her power arrived directly from Amun in this sacred pronouncement on that strange day during these festivities. You can see, and where a lot will say, wow, she's using Egyptian religion, especially those who are very well connected to the cult of Amun-Ra, for her advantage. You could say that. But then again, she's appealing to the fact that this was a miracle that was seen by all. Wow, so this is the beginning of her power. So she's calling back this miracle as a child, right? And so with Thutmose II now dead, his more royal sister wife, Hatshepsut, then became sole pharaoh. And she reigned from 1479 to 1458. Now we got to remember, however, is that it is most likely that she was in charge from 1493 on. So, I mean, earlier, sorry. Yeah, 1493 on. So during his reign. So we just got to keep that in mind, that her reign's a lot longer. So you could say maybe 1493 to 1458, just saying. Now, how was she as a ruler? Okay, this, of course, shows you kind of what she is. She was one of the most efficient rulers of Egypt during the entire 18th century, 18th dynasty, excuse me. Again, I'm not feeling very well, so I apologize. And so what happened is that she ushered in this great era of peace, of prosperity, according to the oracle of Amun. The great creator God approved of her elevation and said as follows. He declared, according to an inscription, "Welcome, my sweet daughter, my favorite, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Martker Hatshepsut, thou art the pharaoh, take possession of the two lands." You notice that she is declared a king in the masculine sense, right? So, however, we do have a problem. When Thutmose II died, there was still a possibility of another male heir to the throne. Remember Thutmose III? Thutmose III, he was the son of Iset, who was the secondary wife of Thutmose II. So Thutmose II, weak as he was, did have another wife, and that wife became pregnant with Thutmose III, but is still a secondary wife. We've got to keep that in mind. So what do you have to do? So Hatshepsut, what she did is she adopted Thutmose III as her own son. So making her both his stepmom and his aunt. And of course, obviously, because Thutmose III was way too young to rule, he was a baby at this time, right? She became assigned as the regent. Now, according to ancient biography, yeah, we have it from Eneni. This person was an important official at the time. It was agreed upon that there was little doubt who fully took on the reins of power at this time. He says as follows. He, Thutmose III, went to heaven. Thutmose II went to heaven, and he joined with the gods. His son stood in his place as king of the two lands as he ruled upon the throne of the one who begot him. His, Thutmose II's sister, the god's wife, Hatshepsut, was doing the affairs of the two lands with her plans. One worked for her, Egypt, with bowed head. And already you can see there's a change going on. It's happening. She's already showing that she is the one who is definitely more powerful than Tutmos III. Of course, Tutmos III can't do much. Tutmos is an infant. But eventually, of course, now it's her son. What happens is that Hatshepsut decided to claim the power of Pharaoh directly for herself. And so what she did is started to minimize her stepson's role in leadership. And it continued to decline until the very time of her death, at which point then suddenly he becomes full pharaoh in his own right. Now there's a lot of support for her power, and there's lots of questions about this. Some would say that those who are in charge wanted her to rule because Tutmos III was a questionable choice for many, and that there are many other possible options to rule instead. So that was the thought, and so that she was the stable choice. They also had a lot of confidence in her because she ruled very well during the time of Tutmos the second. That they all knew that she was a power behind the throne, so to speak. And so they didn't want somebody like Tutmos III. Obviously, he's too young to rule. They wanted her, and she was extremely organized. So what is she going to do? Well, of course, a lot of things that she does is that she is going to rebuild Egypt. It is still a complete mess after the Hyksos, and she focuses in on that. Now, Hatshepsut, another thing that is mentioned of her in Egyptian records is that she was one who was very able to delegate. She was a great delegator. She saw talent when she saw it. And so what she did is she found the very best people for the job to help her rule and to rule in an efficient way. So she did a lot of delegation. And I like that about her. So first of all, she put a certain Senamut, that became her lead administrator, that became her steward. And so he was in charge. Senamut was in charge of much of what goes on in the palace, but he was also in charge of her daughter's, Neferu's household as well. He came from a very humble background. We don't know if he had any family to speak of. Certainly, there's no references to any children. Apparently, he didn't have a wife. But there is some questions, and Karakuni, as well as many other Egyptologists, have thought to themselves that maybe beyond his administrative roles, that he may have been her lover there, and there's some evidence to show that, although some of it's not. I mean, obviously, they did find at this time from a tomb above Deir al-Bahiri a woman being taken from behind. That some have read that this is Hatshepsut, and being submitted to a lover. Some have understood this as Senamut, and she's placed in a subservient position. But we're not sure about this. Again, it could just be any graffiti. However, having said that, we do have a lot of evidence that shows that he talked of her in a very affectionate way, that there's obvious care between the two of them that we see there, that she did, they took care of each other, and the fact that they had matching coffins. Yes, in fact, their two sarcophagi were designed that looked exactly the same. They were made as a pair, even though they're different locations. There seemed to be something there, but there's more. We'll go there. But that's one administrator. Another important official was an elderly Othmos Pentecost, who had a lot of authority early on in her reign. and he was head of all her finances of Egypt, inclusive of the royal treasury. And he was also her daughter's Neferu's tutor. He did arrive from a wealthy background, wealthy family near Thebes. And so there you have it. Now, 5 years into her reign, Hatshepsut found another man to be in a high position in her court. That name is Userman, Useramen. You don't think it's something to say Userman. Userman. And he became her vizier in the south. Now, he also acted as the queen's lieutenant in all areas of palace administration. He was in charge also when it came to aspects of the finances. He helped her with military strategy. His main position was at Thebes, and so he was in charge of the various military campaigns going on in the south. Now, why is this important? And it is important is typically during this period of time, Thutmose III would achieve various positions, and what happened is those positions that Thutmose III would typically receive didn't go to him. It went instead to the vizier. So the vizier assumed these positions, which of course made, again, Thutmose III, placing him into a very weakened position, a lesser position, because she was the one in charge. Now, we see already by the second year of her reign, when she was, appointed regent over Thutmose III, that she was setting herself up to be a complete ruler. We see this first evidence, for example, in a relief that was carved, at the Salon Temple in Nubia that year. And it shows her, it displays her, she's amongst the gods. It describes her various attributes. She's understood as a builder, a ritual officiate, right? And she's given names that apply to a masculine king in this inscription, already in the second year of her reign. Accordingly, the goddess Seth, the guardian of the Nubian southern lands, says as follows about her. So the goddess says, "She is the daughter who has come forth from your limbs. With a loving heart, you have raised her, for she is your loving daughter." And so there you have that. So Hatshepsut is given various titles in this inscription. She's God's wife, king's great wife, but she's also getting other positions. She's given other authority, as you see already from this inscription. Then that very same year, Hatshepsut ordered 2 grand obelisks for the Karnak temple. And so once again, there is another inscription that we're going to be looking at that was carved on the island of Sahel along Aswan. This is near the site where the masonry, where the stone for the great obelisk came from. Now, what's interesting is that this text is inscribed by Senetmut. Yes, remember? So remember Senetmut? So here we have, once again, Senetmut, the administrator, who she's very close to. And here is the inscription. So this is what he says. He says, calls her the princess, the one great of praise and charm. I'm reading it right now. Great of love, the one to whom Ra has given the kingship in truth, amongst the Aeneid, king's daughter, king's sister, God's wife, great king's wife, Hatshepsut, May she live, beloved Satet, lady of Elephantine, beloved Kudim, lord of the first cataract of the region. Now, is it me, or do you sense just a little bit in the way of affection there? Let's just keep on going there, right? Okay, so what will happen here is soon after this inscription, the block from the Karnak temple reveals Hatshepsut. She's wearing the gown of a queen that's on her body. However, she has the crown of a king on her head. We saw this before. I mentioned this before. So there is a precedent for it. So she's wearing what's called the Octave Crown. It's a mixture of ram's horns and tall double plumes. And she is wearing a very short masculine wig. So it looks like almost a masculine hair. You can imagine, it's like, wait, there's not the long locks, it's the short locks of a male, right? And you see here, and of course, there is other things too that indicate there are some changes going on. Now, as I said before, while Ahmose I had focused his efforts on defeating the Hyksos, and Thutmose I had concentrated his efforts in strengthening Egypt's military by expanding the conquest through Syro-Palestine to the Euphrates, Hatshepsut is known as the pharaoh who reestablished all the trade networks that were disturbed during the Second Intermediate Period during the time of the Hyksos. And so her period of rule was a time of great economic growth. One of her trade expeditions that she oversaw was to a place called Punt. Now, she went there and with 5 vessels, each 70 feet long. And by the way, Punt is approximately where Somalia is today, which is along the Red Sea. And they brought back many exotic goods. So obviously, various precious metals, gold, ebony, of course, animals, baboons, animal skins. But precious to her, 31 live myrrh trees. You know, myrrh, like incense and myrrh, right? And she planted those trees in the courtyard before her elaborate mortuary temple. In fact, there's part of the stump that's still there to this day, right? Now, you know, there is, of course, there's a story about this excursion there located, along with a very realistic depiction of Queen Iti of Punt. So here we have Hatshepsut. It was one of the great builders of ancient Egypt. She left many monuments behind. In fact, I have to tell you that there's so many statues of her. It's almost like Ramses II. There's so many statues of her that it's hard to find like a museum, a major museum that doesn't have some kind of image of her, right? She built many structures, especially at Karnak. For example, the precinct of the goddess Mut at Karnak. As I said before, there's so much in the way of damage that was created by the Hyksos. It was still damaged during her reign. So what she did is she rebuilt this particular temple. She erected twin monument obelisks before the entrance of the Temple of Karnak. And so there you have it. In a place known as Beni Hassan, located in Upper Egypt, Hatshepsut built an underground temple that was dedicated to the goddess by the name of Pakhet. So she was into especially the worship of a goddess by the name Pakhet. Who is Pakhet? Pakhet is a combination between 2 lion or cat deities. Sekhmet, who connects to Upper Egypt, and Bast, who connects to Lower Egypt. And so Pakhet was a combination between these two and was worshipped, interestingly enough, in the region between the two. She became very popular. And this was a goddess that was near and dear to the heart of Hatshepsut. So I have to say that Pakhet, wasn't as how do I say it, bloodthirsty and ferocious as Sekhmet. However, definitely not as domesticated as Bastet, right? What does the name Pakhet means? It means she who snatches or tears, right? Now, of Pakhet, one of the coffin texts declares as follows about her: O you of the dawn who wake and sleep, O you who are in Lipness, dwelling after time in Nedet, I have appeared as Pakhet, the great, whose eyes are keen and whose claws are sharp, the lioness who sees and catches by night. So very much like a desert lynx, right? In fact, one of her epithets were she was called a night huntress with sharp eyes and pointed claw. But what happens is that so she was definitely ideal. She was called upon during times of war. So she was called upon, but she was also called upon during times of peace. She worked either way. So, which I find is interesting. With Pakhet, what happened is that because of the Bastet aspect, she was very protective of her young, but she's also protective of mothers, but in a fierce and ferocious way, right? So it's kind of an interesting combination, right? They call her the goddess of the mouth of the Wadi, or she who opens the ways of the stormy rains. That's because this worship came about in this region where there's all these wadis. These are like dry riverbeds along hills that when it rains, suddenly it's filled with water and rushes down and causes destruction, much like, right, Pakhet would do. So Pakhet was also declared as she who has great magic, which is the epithet that's shared by Isis and Hathor. And so she's connected with these two as well. So this is the goddess whom Hatshepsut will focus upon, will worship, right? And so now the temple itself, it's a dedicated Pakhet that's created by Hatshepsut. It was a great underground complex that you can visit today. It's full of grand chambers. I mean, there are catacombs, but they are filled with mummified cats. They were brought from all over Egypt and dedicated to her. These are forms of Bast and Sekhmet. Hatshepsut states the following from an inscription discovered in this shrine. It goes as follows: Pakhet the Great, who traverses the valleys in the midst of the Eastland, whose ways are storm beaten. I made her temple with that which was due to her Aeneid of gods. So it sounds like here, of course, Hatshepsut is talking here. The doors were of acacia wood, fitted with bronze at the seasons. The priests knew this, her city. I made divine their temples, furnished with that which comes forth. The offering table has wrought with silver and gold, chest of linen, every vessel that abides in the place. So again, this is Pakhet, right? Dedicated to Pakhet. And Hatshepsut, saying this by way, if you're wanting to know spelling, is spelled Pakhet. That's Pakhet. So it's a mixture between Sekhmet and Bastet. And so this is the dedication that we found from Hatshepsut, because, she is the royal mother, right? And so, who's protective, especially of her daughter, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. And you can see why she can relate with Pakhet, because Pakhet combines aspects of Upper as well as Lower Egypt as a goddess. And that's exactly what Hatshepsut wants to do. She wants to be the unifier of also Upper and Lower Egypt. So you can see how this is a natural connection. Now, later on, by the way, this particular underground area under the Ptolemies was renamed Speos Artemidos, which means cave of Artemis. For Pakhet became understood by the Greeks as a hunter and connected with the great goddess of the moon and hunt. As you can see, so Pakhet connects with Artemis. Now, near the great underground temple dedicated to the goddess Pakhet, Hatshepsut built a second smaller temple to Pakhet as well. But this time, this temple was both in her name and in the name of her daughter Neferu, who was, of course, the daughter of Thutmose II and was duly married to Thutmose III. Okay, so when Hatshepsut was elevated to Pharaoh after the death of Thutmose II, she gave her title God's wife to Amun, and she gave it to her daughter. And as a result, she made her daughter Neferu the high priestess of the cult of Amun, because now, obviously, Hatshepsut is now the Pharaoh, right? According to the local Theban myth, the Pharaoh was supposed to be the offspring of a human mother and the great invisible creator god Amun himself. This was a Theban idea, but there you have it. But what's going to happen is something kind of awkward. Here we go. So now her daughter is in the role of God's wife of Amun. So Neferu is now depicted in her mother's red chapel of Karnak. She's shown as performing the ritual ceremony with a priest that appears to be connected with destroying the names of their enemies. Yeah, if you want to defeat somebody, what you do is you destroy their names. And by destroying their names, you destroy them. It's, obviously this magic aspect. What happens is Hatshepsut, also gave Neferu two other titles, that of Lady of Upper and Lower Egypt, and the second one is Mistress of the Lands. Now, what happened here is, what about Thutmose III? I mean, after all, Neferu is Thutmose III's wife, right? Because he made him marry him, So what's going to happen there? So what she did is something very strange. So what happened is, in the various ceremonies where it's supposed to be Neferu, that is officiating with her husband, who's of course supposed to be the Pharaoh, he's not there, but Hatshepsut takes on the role of the male Pharaoh with her daughter. So she played the part of a husband while her daughter was put into the strange position of acting as her mother's wife. Yeah. Wow. You see, Thutmose the third's probably not going to like this too much. Wow, I'm really being demoted here. It's like, I was like, she's taking my place. So So Hatshepsut, yeah. So there you have it. Oh man, I tell you, I, do you sense that Tutmosis III is definitely put off to the side or not, right? But she is accentuating the power of her daughter. So, and which I think is so you do have now these two women rising to so much power. Now, Hatshepsut also was created her great mortuary temple complex. It's located on the west side of the Nile near Deir al-Bahari. It's a giant. I mean, it's a giant complex. The focus architecturally is on the what's called the Holy of Holies, the Disaru, which is a grand colonnaded mortuary temple resting upon two colonnaded terraces and reached via a very long ramp, traversing them with a sharp cliff behind it. Each of the terraces was accented by an elaborate, well-watered garden. When Hatshepsut created her this funerary temple around 1480 BCE, she wished to create a representation of the realm of paradise of Ammon, and that there would be these terraced gardens that connect to this idyllic realm. Right, this was a place for the sun god on earth. Now, remember the myrrh trees? The myrrh trees were then brought from this expedition to Punt and placed there. Myrrh was very important, so now myrrh is obviously because a major commodity of Egypt, but also they're called two Persea trees. Persea trees. These are planted on either side of the main entrance. And the Persea trees are connected to the realm of the underworld. In fact, they're called the Ishtit. The fruit is pear-shaped. It's connected to the avocado. The branches of the Persea were often part of funerary bouquets and represented the Sacred Heart of Horus. So, anyway, but it's also connected in many ways to the tree of life. So we will see, in fact, there are images where Ra splits the Ishtad tree, representing the tree of life, in the morning after his victory over his enemies. And so you're seeing this there. It's a very much a sacred tree. There's even the idea that the phoenix, when it rises from the ashes, sometimes it arises from the Persea tree. And so the ashes of the Persea tree, which is again the tree of life, but is also the tree of the underworld. So two of these are placed before her temple. Well, okay, so now because I do want to say that because of the yellow coloring of the fruit, the Persea tree was often associated with the sun, and so also had solar connections, especially with Ra. According to the book of Ani, Ra was portrayed as a cat hanging about a Persea tree that represents the tree of life. And the inscription, I love this inscription, I have to read it to you. It goes as follows: I am the cat which fought near the Persea tree in Anu on the night when the foes of Neferneferu were destroyed. Who is this cat? This male cat is Ra himself, and he was called Mao, that's a meow, because of the speech of the god Sa, who said concerning him, he is like Mao unto that which he hath made. Therefore did the name of Ra become Mao. As concerning the fight which took place near the Persea tree in Anu, these words have reference to the slaughter of children of rebellion when righteous retribution was meted out, yada yada. I just think it's like you think of Ra, you think of Ra being Mao. Now, Ra the cat hanging around the Persea tree, right? So this tree again was sacred, but also sacred to Hatshepsut. So we are learning a lot about Hatshepsut, the goddesses, the goddess specifically that she worships, Pakhet, which she considers very important when it comes to symbols. Let's conclude with her. Let's go. Okay, so now Hatshepsut, let's take a look at her. We're looking at the mortuary temple, and we take a look, and Hatshepsut is depicted in full pharaonic regalia, making offerings to Horus. The staff of Osiris stands to her left. By this time when the temple is built, she is fully pharaoh. But let's go into a little backdrop here. Now, Hatshepsut took on all the regalia and symbols assumed by the male pharaohs, without exception. She took them all on eventually. She even took on the Shinbite kilt, so she wore a kilt. She had the Kot headcloth with the uraeus, and yes, she even wore the false beard itself. In these depictions, Hatshepsut's breasts are typically covered, her arms being crossed, holding the two staffs of the two kingdoms. But Hatshepsut still, at first, wasn't sure how to depict herself. Should she depict herself as female or male? And she experimented with both early on. So she wasn't sure. So the early years of her reign, it typically shows her wearing a long dress of a woman, but she has the crown of a king on her head. At some point, she realized that she needed to change these images. So she had her shoulders widened and extended stance of her legs. So, that seemed to give her more of a powerful figure, and so she's shown as being active. Well, then, but she still wants to retain at first her female core. So she's still wearing a dress, but then she decides that maybe I should go shirtless. So she goes shirtless, like many of the pharaohs. So she's bare-chested in some images like a man. Well, but she doesn't reduce her breasts. So you could see that she has breasts that are showing. So she's not getting rid of the breasts, but she's being bare-chested like a man. But eventually, the images will change. And so she'll, along with the broad shoulders of a boy, the breasts will slowly evolve into pectoral muscles. And so the breasts will eventually disappear. In the first years of her reign, she showed herself sometimes in the form of Osiris. But what I find is interesting there is that this Osiris still has feminine characteristics, a dainty chin, heart-shaped face. So you see that. And now what I find is interesting is that typically women were depicted as yellow in paintings, and men were depicted in red. But what happened is that her, as far as the Osiris figures are concerned, it kind of got, how do I put this? It was a strange blending of red and yellow. And so some of the images look like they're orange. You have these orange Osiris, so which represents, in a sense, her. I think it's interesting that she took on Osiris as a connection, not Isis. So, right. But eventually, as time goes on, Hatshepsut will be displayed as completely male in almost every regards, and shown as with manly courage and leading various campaigns, fighting against the enemies and destroying the evildoers, and extending out Egypt, and Hatshepsut then is shown as completely as just any pharaoh, right? So she went all in every single way. except now about her pronoun. So she was still described as a she or as a her. However, some cases she will be called the son of Ra, as well as the daughter of Ra. And there are a few occasions where she will take on the masculine he. And of course, always being king of Egypt. So, so he who belongs to the sedge plant and the bee, So now, so she becomes full pharaoh in every regards. And once again, we're back to, well, I mean, is this patriarchy? Is this, she's losing her femininity? But then again, you have this whole idea of, oh yeah, but she's also taking on a role. She's taking on a position, a traditional position of all the regalia. And yet I don't feel that she has lost her femininity in any way. But we do have her mummy. In 2007, DNA analysis identified it beyond a reasonable doubt. There was actually, what happened is this, is that there's a fragment of a hip and a femur from the mummy, revealing a direct connection to a mummy of another female royal relative, and a CT scan of a single tooth that was placed in a box with Hatshepsut's name. So from that, we're able to identify the mummy. Yeah, so there you have a tooth there. It has the name Hatshepsut. You open it up, there's a tooth. So you get the DNA and going, hey, guess what? So from this fragment of a hip and femur from another mummy, and from this tooth, we're able to identify the body. What does the body look like? By the way, the tooth fit directly into the socket, right into her mummy's jaw. Well, looking at the inspection, we realize in real life she had the typical overbite, pronounced overbite, that you see of many of the pharaohs of this particular dynasty. So her nail polish was black and red. The pharaoh was overweight. There are many skin lesions on her, and she had extensive tooth decay. Also, there's indication that she had an insulin problem, and a lot of people have diagnosed that she did have, diabetes as a result of what looks like poor eating habits. She also had a skin disease known as alopecia, being bald in front, but she had hair kind of growing in back there. And the age of her death was around 50 years of age. But she, again, was considered a great pharaoh. Regardless of male or female, she was great in her own right. After her death, got to conclude, Hatshepsut, after her death, you got, remember Thutmose III? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Thutmose III, yeah. As soon as she died, he became pharaoh. And he reigned for another 30 years. He became known as a great conqueror. Towards the end of his reign, he started destroying and erasing her inscriptions and her contributions. He even moved her mummy to another location. Some people think Thutmose III was probably pretty mad about how he was treated by Hatshepsut. But others say, no. What happens is that he's trying to make way for his own claimant by the name of Ahhotep IV as pharaoh. He didn't want to have any rival people who claim, and so he's clearing this all out so he can rule instead. And so there you have it. So is she the last one? Of course not. She's not the last female pharaoh. Do we have more? We don't have any more time, but yeah, we have quite a bit more. And of course, obviously, Nefertiti was a co-pharaoh of Akhenaten later on, right? And she was the first wife, and she attained exactly the same kinds of powers and regalia, and they used their names interchangeably. And so she was she was a pharaoh. And of course, we know that now that we know that she kept living longer than we thought, as evidence from an archaeologist in Leuven. We thought that she died earlier, but turns out she lived a longer period of time, and know that she was indeed a sole pharaoh too, and that was Neferneferuaten, who ruled from 1334 to 1332. That was actually Nefertiti, and her reign continued on as a sole ruler after Akhenaten. And then, of course, you have Tausret, 1197 to 1189, BCE, and then later on when the Ptolemies take over, of course, you got Cleopatra the First, right? And Cleopatra the Second, and moving on, and of course, obviously, eventually, we're going to get to Cleopatra the Third and Bernice the Third, and of course Cleopatra the Seventh, of course, who's the famous Cleopatra that we all know and love so well. So Hatshepsut is just only one of so many female pharaohs to hold the throne of Egypt and to bear the royal regalia in complete equality. And of course, that continues on all the way to Cleopatra VII, which is the end of the pharaonic line. And so I find it interesting that you find female pharaohs all the way back at the beginning of the line of the pharaohs and at the very end. And you can see that this is a great way to understand how Egypt viewed not only the pharaohs, but also women in general in Egypt. Thank you very much. Have a great night.